Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode number 23, being recorded on Friday the 4th of March 2016. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today, whenever it is you find yourself watching this. So at the end of the previous episode, we picked up the Great Isz Chalice from Ebrietas, Daughter of the Cosmos. So just to review, the item description reads, a chalice that breaks a labyrinth seal. Great chalices unlock deeper reaches of the labyrinth. The Great Isz Chalice became the cornerstone of the choir, the elite delegation of the Healing Church. It was also the first great chalice brought back to the surface since the time of Bergenworth, and allowed the choir to have audience with Ebrietas. So I'm still not quite sure what to make of that last sentence, that the chalice allowed the choir to have an audience with Ebrietas. But there are nevertheless several things that I'm going to want to draw attention to in the course of this episode as we explore this chalice. And the most notable, and the one that jumps out at you right away, is the particle effects. Which very much is consistent with the Cosmos particle effects that we've been seeing in the rest of the game. And in several of the past boss fights, I've made a point of slowing down and zooming in on the particle effects when we see them. So with all of the bosses so for example, the Living Failures, you can see the Living Failures channeling the Cosmos. Same thing with the Celestial Emissary, and of course with Ebrietas, who I mistakenly referred to Rom a bunch of times in the previous episode, so I apologize for that. In past episodes, the only real Chalice Dungeon exploration we've done in this series is exploring the bosses and what they mean. I wanted to, for this chalice as well as the Thumaru, excuse me, it's going to take me a while to get used to that, the Thumaru Ihil Chalice. I did want to spend a little bit of time in this episode looking at the Chalice Dungeons themselves and talking about them in general, in addition to highlighting specific aspects of this one and the Thumaru Ihil Chalice, which will be several episodes from now. So I guess first and foremost, as we noted very early on in the playthrough, this is the same statue that we find in the Hunter's Dream, looking over the rune workshop bench. And it has what appears to either be stitches or a crown of thorns over this figure who may or may not represent the doll, but given the revelations of the DLC, which showed that the doll is, in a sense, a proxy for Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower, formerly Lady Maria of the Hunters, or of the First Hunters, that it seems less likely to me that these statues, which, if we're to assume that the Pthumerians were the ones who either built this place up or are in some way responsible for the state in which we find the Chalice Dungeons, or the old Underground Labyrinth, which in my view is the Waking World equivalent of the Chalice Dungeons, and that when we're in the Chalice Dungeons, we are, in fact, in a Dreamlands reflection of the old Underground Labyrinth. I'm less convinced that those statues are meant to serve as a proxy for the doll, or are meant to represent the doll, I should say. And so further to my point from the previous episode, as well as the episode in which we first visited Yosefka's clinic, I believe it was episode 10, when I first came up with this supposition that this is tomb mold. And specifically that it is level 5 tomb mold. And you can see that even though it mentions that it matures to bear giant spores, that the effect that the spores have, or if you read that description, you look at the image and you think that, okay, well, that effect around the tomb mold itself would appear to be spores. But when you notice that with all of the high-level Chalice Dungeon materials, all of the materials that are used for the deepest recesses of the Chalice Dungeons, that they all have a similar Cosmos-esque effect. And that the lower level stuff, the materials that are used for the shallower depths of the Chalice Dungeons, that they do not have that same effect. And so, given the placement of these things, these plants, or as I've argued, this tomb mold, and given the particle effects that we see everywhere here, that it seems to support that assertion that yes, this is tomb mold. It seems all but certain at this point. I also don't know what to make of this webbing here. It very much looks like spider webs. I suppose it could be something else that I'm just not considering at this moment. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. So I mentioned that I did want to talk a little bit about the Chalice Dungeons in general, in addition to providing specific commentary on this Chalice Dungeon. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is just with respect to, because I know that there are a lot of people out there, and I, if I had to guess, I would imagine that this episode would probably be among the lower viewed episodes in Let's Talk Lore, because a lot of people, yeah, just don't like the Chalice Dungeons. And that's totally fair. And I was just thinking, I can't remember where the like portal is, where the messengers carry you from one spot to another and put you in a very compromising position within another spot in the same layer in which you find yourself. And just as I was thinking that, I walked right into it. Oh, that's funny. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what I was saying was that I did want to talk a little bit about my general rules for doing the Chalice Dungeons. So, one of the things that people gripe about with the Chalice Dungeons, and it's a valid criticism to levy against them, is that it can be very easy to get lost, because so much of the geography looks the same, and you know, it's like that by its very nature, so that they can be modular and you can switch things around. But if you, and let me be clear when I say the rules I'm about to outline are by no means universal or perfect, and that you may have your own set of rules for exploring the Chalice Dungeons, but the point is that I think the easiest way of doing it is to come up with your own set of rules that will govern your exploration of the Chalice Dungeons, so as to achieve some sort of consistency in such a way that it allows you to explore them without being frustrated. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that there are two for me, I have two very specific guidelines as to how it is that I go about exploring a given Chalice Dungeon. And I don't believe, for instance, it works really in this layer, but I do find generally that it's very helpful. So the first rule is that I always go up before I go down. And the reason for that is that a lot of the end of layer shortcuts, so rather than having to backtrack all the way back to where you came from, a lot of the end of layer, or end of path shortcuts in the Chalice Dungeons involve just simply dropping down from somewhere high to somewhere low. So even though, again, it doesn't always work, you might want to try, if you're one of those people who has trouble exploring the Chalice Dungeons, you might want to try going high before you go low. So if you're faced with two paths, one is up a ladder, one is through a doorway, you're going to want to go up the ladder first. And then the second rule is that I always go through open doorways before doors. So that is to say, if I'm faced with two different paths, one requires me to open a door and one just requires me to walk through a doorway, I'm always going to go through the doorway first. So then that way it helps me remember whether or not I've been to a certain place. Because if I've not opened the door, then obviously I've not been there. So that way you eliminate your possible paths in a way that allows you to remember which path you've taken and which you haven't. And so those are my two very simple, but I think very helpful rules for exploring the Chalice Dungeons, that if you've, struggled in the past with the Chalice Dungeons, and if you found that you've gotten frustrated because you tend to get lost, then that's something you might consider trying out. Because I do think they're very much worth exploring, for several reasons, and we'll go into that in a little bit. First and foremost, and the reason why I stopped here, is this thing here. So this is another variation on what I'm essentially just going to call a sea monster that we find in pretty much every Chalice Dungeon, and specifically in the side areas that look like this, because even though this is a unique Chalice Dungeon in that it has like a new skin on it, they're all more or less still laid out the same. And around the time when JSF and I were getting ready to record the episode, or it may have been after, for the Fishing Hamlet, one of the things that we discussed, but that I don't believe made it into the final episode, was how in the Fishing Hamlet, you find, and it's not this specific type, there's another type of sea monster, the sea monster model, I guess we'll call it, that is identical to the one that we find in the Fishing Hamlet. And we'll keep our eyes peeled for that, because I do think that we'll find it elsewhere here. And yeah, actually, before I get into that, we'll look for the one that actually is a match for the one that's in the Chalice Dungeons. But keep that in mind going forward, because it does seem as though Hidetaka Miyazaki may have been inspired in some way by a finding, quote-unquote, in the field of cryptozoology, which is essentially the study of unknown or undiscovered creatures. So things like the Loch Ness Monster, which is obviously relevant in this case, as well as the things like Bigfoot and whatever. So that's something that we'll talk about. Another thing worth talking about are these guys, because these are Pthumerians. And you can see, just like the statues we found in the at the Altar of Despair, all Pthumerians, I said it again, Pthumerians, all Pthumerians seem to have that same agape circular mouth shape. Very much consistent with those statues that we found. No, friend. I was just... Friend, please. And so I have no idea what to think of this. The circular candle arrangement makes me think of, you know, some sort of pagan ritual. So maybe Dahlia Darkside can speak to what this might signify. But this is the spot where, yeah, if you walk in the middle, then the messengers will take you and warp you for some reason, I do not know why, beyond simply just trolling the player, from one spot to another. And this only exists in the Isz Gravestone, where we currently are. And so maybe there's something in the blue effect that we just saw as we got pulled into that portal. Maybe it corresponds to a rune or something like that, I'm not sure. But it is certainly interesting. And also somewhat of an inconvenience, but... Something else that's very interesting about the Chalice Dungeons is how we find... And there's a fair bit of debris here, so I can't even really tell if there was anything in those coffins. So maybe I'll slow that down to see whether or not we can actually see body parts falling out of them, as we do when we break coffins in the waking world. It's very hard to tell in full motion. And we do also find all over the place carts, just as we do, again, throughout Yharnam, and especially in Yahar'gul Unseen Village, for ostensibly, yeah, carting body parts around. And we find several of the Pthumerians just sort of listless and just sitting there and not really doing anything. And of course they do become aggressive when you come closer to them, but see, I can't even lock onto him. Unfortunately, because of this foliage here, we were not going to be able to get a good look at this guy, but yeah, you can see he's not in the greatest shape. He seems to be malnourished. He's got scars and lesions all over his skin. And he's tired. He appears to be using a cleaver of some sort. So we'll just leave him be. So again, up before down, so we're going to this open door now. And what do you know? There's the switch. Being guarded by 2 celestial children and a Brainsucker. Another thing that you may find helpful for navigating the Chalice Dungeons are these little messengers who stand in front of doors with these lanterns, which when they are lit with a blue flame, indicates to you that you have already been into this door. You have already done what you needed to do in this area. Or I think it may just be when you walk by. So maybe if you haven't flipped the switch, they'll still be there, but... Am I not online? I thought I was online. Because something that, again, if early on in the game you played the Chalice Dungeons and you were not particularly impressed with them, these statues look to be of humans and or of humans of the present, as opposed to if indeed the Pthumerians are humans themselves. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Brainsuckers in a little bit as well. But if you played the Chalice Dungeons early on and you were not particularly impressed with them, and that's, again, a fair position to have, I have no problem with that, but you might want to consider revisiting them in light of the, I think it was 1.07, the update that prepared the game for the old Hunters. Because what happened with that update is that they took all of the Chalice Dungeons and converted them into what are now called shared fixed dungeons. So we see here more hanged men rituals, reminiscent of the Hunter's Mark. So as shared fixed dungeons, every time you create a Chalice Dungeon, you will be given the option. The default option is to create a shared fixed dungeon, whereas previously everyone would create a dungeon with their own unique Chalice Dungeon glyph. And with that glyph, you know, if you wanted to co-op with someone, you would both have to have the same glyph open and available. What am I stuck on here? But that's no longer a problem. So if you're online, which I thought I was, so we'll have to fix that after this boss, the first layer boss. You will see messages everywhere, you know, just like any other area in the game, because it's much more highly populated now. And so if, once again, Chalice Dungeons are something that you were avoiding up to this point, you may find it helpful to summon help, which is they're fairly active now, in any time I've tested that. And there are also, in some layers, in the preset Chalice Dungeons, there are also NPC summons as well, that you can summon with the old Hunter spell. So something I've tried to do previously is to get a view of them actually lighting up the lantern, because you can see here once again, there's no blue flame there, because we've not been into this doorway. So I guess it's... oh, there it is. I missed it, but he just lit it. So I guess it's just as soon as you go by that spot, they light it to indicate that you've already been there. Now, I can't recall whether there is any significant loot in this area. So each layer is liable to be divided up into 3 different parts. So there could be a pre-main area treasure spot, a post-main area treasure spot, and then the main spot. That's a terrible way of describing it, but so this would be the post layer treasure area. I don't know how to describe it. But we find here what seems to be a tomb. Or I suppose to some extent this whole place would be a tomb, but... and the most Christian-like iconography, I think, in the entire game. This looks very much... whereas in the rest of the game, we do find what seem almost like crucifixes, but... and I think it's a little bit too symmetrical to be a crucifix in the Christian tradition, but it does look pretty close. Okay, so based on our rules, once again, we have 2 different paths before us. So there's an open doorway and stairs. So we're going to go up before we go down. And I seem to recall this being an especially nasty room, so... I've not yet decided how I'm going to edit all of this together. because this may be a while, and I think I've already been recording for something like 20 minutes. So we shall see. There may be fast forwards at some points if I get especially bogged down with enemies in a particular area. Because even though we're at level 244 at this point, the depths of the Chalice Dungeons are still a very nasty place, even if you're really high level. And we see here something that you see in a lot of the Depth 5 root Chalice Dungeons, and that is enemies who were formerly bosses becoming just simple mobs. And that is very interesting. Something that I never noticed is with the Keeper of the Old Lords after you kill them. Of course, when you kill the boss version of the Keeper of the Old Lords, that I believe they just dissipate just like any other boss does. But that Keeper, the Mob Keeper, just kind of dissipates into flame. And of course, the Crystal Lizards in the Chalice Dungeons drop gems as opposed to upgrade materials. As you can see, it's a perfect demonstration of the up before down rule. Is that we went up, although at this... How did you get over here? I was wondering, I thought that there were two of them, and then I lost track of... He like fell through the floor or something. Hi, friend. That was very strange. But at the same time, this is also a demonstration of how it doesn't always work, because we went up before down, but that kept us from being able to explore this specific area here. So, but even still, if you have that rule, it can very easily help you to remember where you've explored and where you've not yet explored. And once again, same applies here, because we have these guys who will light up the lamps as soon as we pass by them. This seems too quiet. Oh, hello. So, level 5 Tomb Mold. And since we're in another one of these areas, I think this looks exactly the same as the one that we saw in the first layer, so maybe this one here is unique to the Isz Gravestone. So we'll have to potentially, if that is indeed the case, I do want to highlight the ones that I found in the other Chalice Dungeons, because those ones are identical to the one that we find in Fishing Hamlet. And so the reason why I'm recording this, basically the day after I recorded the previous episode, is that I've been thinking a lot about some of the comments that I addressed over the course of that episode. And one of the comments I addressed, I believe it was from Deso Penguin, who got me thinking about the and also the comment from my conversation with JSF previously, which got me thinking about Kin and Great One as existing kind of along a scale, so to speak, in that you have the likes of the Brainsucker, who I want to say that the Brainsuckers are weak to the Kin damage type, but I can't remember if they actually are. But it does seem to me as though the Isz Gravestone Chalice, the Chalice Dungeon, the preset one, that the order of the bosses is meant to clue us into something. And I'll elaborate on that in just a little bit. Alright, we're going to fire back to the Hunter's Dream and, yeah, replenish our stuff, but mostly just because I want to go online at this point. Alright, so now that we're online, you can see that the number of messengers surrounding the lamp has actually increased. And that's because I'm not sure if this is something I've mentioned before, but that's it's an indication of the extent of the online activity in the area. So that's a pretty nice touch, I think. Something else I do when going from one layer to the next is I always ensure to send the elevator back up. So in that way, if there is a pre-area loot place, then I would go to that place instead of going to light the lamp. So then I would know, again, it's for me at least, the thing that makes the Chalice Dungeons bearable is having these systems that help me remember what I've done and what I haven't. And so maybe it's different for other people, but for me that's something that I think is a big help. I have no idea what just happened there, but that scared me. Did I step on a pressure plate? I don't think I did. I was just looking at the mouths of these statues here. They remind me of enemies from the Mario games, but also they seem to be just exaggerated representations of the Pthumerians themselves. Again, they have that very distinctive mouth shape. And these appear to be okay, I was going to say they appear to be incense burners, but I did see a bunch of skulls popping out of there just now. So yeah, these urns are filled with skulls for some reason. I guess that person was AFK and came back to an enemy attacking them or something like that. So yeah, even when I'm playing online, I still tend to test for illusory walls just out of habit more than anything else. And this here is an elevator. So in keeping with our rule, we're going to go up before we go down, but I just wanted to have a look at it first. So we see that there are lots of bones and what appear to be body parts there. And that, I don't know what these things are that are, I guess that's just candle wax. So perhaps meant to indicate that these candles have been burning for a very long time. Oh, hidden path. I don't know what that's referring to. I believe this opens only from the other side. So maybe that's what they're referring to. So something else that's very interesting about these two different types of statues here. This one seems to be the representation of a Pthumerian beast. Because you'll notice that this one, even though it's wearing a garb of some sort, it is nevertheless, it has very smooth skin, so just like the ones, the Pthumerians we find just kind of hanging out all over the place. Whereas this one appears to have fur. Smooth arms, but and it's really hard to say whether this is just as a result of the way it's holding its arms, but it does kind of seem like it might just be the way it's holding its arms, but I was thinking that one of the arms might actually be longer than the other, consistent with the beasts that we see all over Yharnam. So adding further credence to the idea that this has all happened before and it's all going to happen again. And there is, I believe, a hidden chest somewhere here in the wall. Maybe it's not in this layer. Yeah. So this is one instance in which the up before down does not work. Because the only path we have there is that door. Or these doors, I should say, but they're both shortcuts. So in this case, it's actually down before up. And that's the lamp. So yeah, even if you have these rules, you're still liable to get lost, and that's fine. But if you have that structure there, I feel like it makes it a lot easier and a lot less frustrating. I hate these enemies. Something that Redgrave pointed out on one of his streams when he was exploring the Chalice Dungeons, and I don't believe it was this scorpion specifically, but no, it was a different variant of the scorpion. But this appears to be kind of like a half scorpion, half beast, in a way, because you see it has the fur of a beast. But the thing that Redgrave pointed out was that one of them, if you look at their faces, it looks almost like it has a human face. But I think that's another variant of it. And recall that the poison in Bloodborne seems to be very much tied to, you know, this notion of vermin and things being impure. And recall that I mentioned that there are carts which seem to contain human bodies, although we can't really see anything here. Several of these gravestones also have inscriptions on it, and this one you can kind of see it. It looks almost like the Hunter's Mark, but maybe a variant of it. And this corpse here had sedatives on it, which seems appropriate given where we are. Those who delve into the arcane fall all too easily into madness, and thick human blood serves to calm the frayed nerves of these inquisitive minds. Naturally, this often leads to a reliance on blood ministration. So this bell here is very interesting, but I have no idea what to make of it, because it doesn't seem to serve any actual purpose. And here we have one of Patch's compatriots. The other one I killed accidentally. And I've not ever stuck around long enough hanging out with these guys to see that they have an odd attack like that. So I have no idea what that attack was. It looked almost like it was a buff or something. Okay, so this is a shortcut. So we're going to go ahead and open that up. And you can see that in some rooms the Cosmos effect is way stronger than in others. So in this room, for instance, as soon as I opened the door, that was the first thing that came to mind. I was like, wow, look at that. Whereas you may recall at the beginning of the episode when I'm standing there basically trying to catch a glimpse of it. But here it's everywhere and it's persistent. It sort of looks like a nebula. Which is, if you're not familiar, basically a cloud of star stuff that may or may not eventually swirl together to form an actual star. And I know I've been talking a lot about astronomy in recent episodes, but that's because it's directly relevant and directly related to what it is that the choir and the Healing Church seem to have been doing. But just to clarify, when I say the word star, often people get confused by the distinction between the word star and the name sun. Because the sun is a star, but it's just we've named it the sun. And so in the same... Rats, I'm trying to talk about astronomy here and kill a crystal lizard at once. Can you please just give me 1 second? Our solar system is named as such because it is the system of the sun. Because the sun was originally named Sol, S-O-L, which, interestingly enough, is very consistent with Solaire, named as such because of, his affinity for the sun. So if you're talking about a solar system that isn't ours, that isn't the system of the sun, you would actually call it a planetary system. And similarly, if you're talking about a sun that, quote unquote, that is in another that isn't ours, then you just call it a star. So when I say star, I'm referring to the quote unquote sun of another planetary system, or just a generic sun. So yeah, it does appear as though this sea monster is specific to the Isz Gravestone, which is very interesting. I don't believe there's any treasure here. But there is a different form of treasure in the form of implicit storytelling here, or at least I believe there is. This particular type of room in another Chalice dungeon, you find a few Pthumerian workers just sort of sitting there hammering away at the wall. But look at this guy over here. He's got his head in his hands, and he's just kind of, yeah, he's not doing especially well. The guy on the left is just pacing back and forth. And of course, underneath them, just piles and piles of bodies. I was about to attack them, but no reason to do that, unless they start attacking me. Which it doesn't seem as though they're especially keen on doing. So yeah, kind of sad. But that would seem to be the loot of this area. And when walking through these tunnels, I always try to walk to the side, because my least favorite part of the Chalice Dungeons are the slime monsters, and I think that we're looking at, oh, I hate those things so much. And if you're walking right down the middle of this particular kind of path, then they can jump right on your head. They have so much health too. So maybe it's that they're only weak against flame, maybe? Let's see. I honestly can't tell. Okay, alright, screw you, I'm not even gonna bother. Pearl Slug. Material used in a Holy Chalice ritual. Of all the strange life forms that reside in the nooks and crannies of the old labyrinth, the slugs are clear signs of the left behind great ones. Yeah, I've definitely missed something here. I've missed that treasure, so let's see if we can try and figure out how to get to it. I think that might be a bit of trickery, actually. Yeah, see, sometimes it plays tricks on you like that. I don't know. I don't think it's intentional, an intentional trick being played on you. But that shortcut exit, actually, you need to get there from the treasure area, and not from the main area itself. And just as with the Brainsuckers on the first layer, there's a little bit of foreshadowing going on there in terms of the boss that's coming up. And so, yeah, as I alluded to earlier, I do think that there may be something to the order in which we find the bosses in this area. In that, the deeper you get, the closer you get to a kin that is close to being closer to Great One status. And so as we established in kind of the comment segment of the previous episode, the line between kin and Great One isn't a clear cut. There's no clear-cut distinction between the two, and in fact, you know, in spite of our best efforts, we've not been able to come up with a clear definition of what constitutes a Great One. And I do think that, so if you recall that the first boss in this, the boss of the first layer was a Brainsucker. The boss of this layer, if I recall correctly, is the Celestial Emissary. And then the boss of the third layer is, once again, Ebrietas. So it would seem to be communicating a scale of sorts in terms of the kin and you know, the extent to which where they stand on the scale of, if indeed a scale is a right way to look at it, or a spectrum of Great One to kin. That the deeper you get, the less kin-like the boss is. Oh, well, that's not good. It's a good thing we still have our trusty. I do have a cursed blood gem in my church pick, which decreases the durability. So I suppose I can't complain about the fact that our durability is screwed on that weapon now. But I have been enjoying the church pick quite a bit. So it takes a very special kind of weapon to get me to put down my saw cleaver, that's for sure. Despicable inquisitiveness. A reference to the fact that this is a dead end. It's like a rug, but like a banner. There's really no distinct markings on it. And you can see not very clearly, but you can see the hangman right there. It's not an exact replica of the hunter's mark, but it's very close. found it. Oh, Snake. Oh, Cosmos. So this is the exact same sea monster that we find in the fishing hamlet. Whoops. And I did want to raise... so I did a quick Google search and found a Daily Mail article, and I'm not all that familiar with UK publications, but from what I'm seeing on this website here, I actually did a Google image search based on the image that JSF sent to me, and this was the first article that popped up. So I apologize to anyone who's in the UK and corroborates my suspicion that this is kind of a tabloid. Judging that based on like the ads I'm seeing on the side and whatnot. But that aside, this story was published. I'm going to put down my controller for a second here. This story was published in 2011. So not too far, not too long before Miyazaki would have started kicking around ideas for what would eventually become Bloodborne. And it's a story about, I'll just read from the article. So, certainly this study of the possible existence of sea monsters and other creatures of legend, known as cryptozoology, remains an area that captures the imagination of scientists and lay people alike. Last week I took part in a major debate at the Zoological Society in London, at which I and my colleagues, that's awkward, wondered whether there might be more to these stories than mere myth. Only this week, photographs emerged of the large carcass of an unidentified sea creature washed up on the beach near Aberdeen. It is the subject of fevered speculation, with some claiming it is a sea monster and others more sensibly saying it's a plain old pilot whale. So, I don't know about you, but I'm just trying to angle the screen here so I can get the picture next to it so that we can do a little side-by-side here. So I don't know about you, but I think that that is an exact replica of this photo here. And we find this exact skeleton in the fishing hamlet. So I don't know if there's any actual relevance to this. But insofar as the Great Ones inhabit both a watery place, a watery world, and an abyssal cosmos, and insofar as the abyssal cosmos is at its strongest, or, exists to some extent in the old underground labyrinth, and insofar as, I know there's a lot of layers to this, but insofar as the Chalice Dungeons are a reflection of the old underground labyrinth, yeah, a lot of those pieces come together to kind of give the impression of the Chalice Dungeons as being a very important place from a story perspective. And I have heard several people mention or argue in the aftermath of the DLC that the DLC makes the Chalice Dungeons irrelevant in terms of the story of the game. And I don't think that is a valid, it's a valid viewpoint to not like the Chalice Dungeons, but I do think that the Chalice Dungeons remain, and in fact that they're more relevant in light of the DLC than they were prior to that. So yeah, I'm very glad we came down this path, because I was beginning to worry that, yeah, we were going to have... Oh, you have so much health. Why do you have so much health? I'm not even going to bother with you. But I'm very glad we came down this path, because I was originally thinking maybe we'll just go to the boss. Because I was starting to think that maybe we weren't going to come across that particular model of the sea monster in this place. And so we have two different paths, one with a door, one without, so we're going to go check out the one without a door. And it leads us back to where we've already been, so we're gonna open the door. So there's 2 Brainsuckers there. No mercy for insight. Yeah. Well said. Lure is effective. Sure. So the Brainsuckers seem to some degree to be failed products of Ascension. In that they're clearly... Oh, it's so gross to look at least for me. But they're clearly... They seem to be attempts at Ascension in a way that... They just didn't... Their hands are really elongated, too. The Celestial Emissaries, or just the Celestials, full stop, seem to represent a much better, or a much more successful attempt at Ascension, or an attempt at communing with the Great Ones, with the cosmos. Speaking of which, hey buddy, I didn't see you there. What you doing? Notice once again the blood there, that is what Redgrave calls serum, as opposed to just the plain red blood that we find when killing several other enemies in the game, whether they're great ones or just beasts. Okay, on to the boss. I'm very sorry if you are a big fan of the music for that boss fight, but something I wanted to do at one point or another was to do either that boss fight or the one at the orphanage, at the Lumen Flower Gardens, so as to allow us to pay attention to the sounds that the creatures, that the Celestials actually make. So now that we're in the third layer, whereas in the first two layers, nothing but messages here, okay. I've said before, I'll say it again, I get really annoyed by messages that block prompts. So, I usually rate messages up, but if your message blocks a command prompt, like opening a door or pulling a lever, then that's when I give foul ratings. So our usual thing applies here. We're going to go up before we go down. Although this appears to be a shortcut exit. Yep. So we're going to head here first. What's interesting about these guys is that in the waking world, the only Celestials we find who are capable of using projectile attacks, and this was also true of the Celestial Emissary boss, that the only ones we find capable of doing that are the bosses who, or are the Celestials who have the antennae coming out of their heads. This one does not, and they can still use the projectile attacks anyway. So I don't know what that actually means, but it's interesting. And that is very interesting, that we would find a Scourge Beast here. This is the first beast we've seen in the entire dungeon. And I honestly have no idea what to make of the fact that it's here. But this is a nasty, nasty room. So maybe it's just to add to the nastiness that's already there. Hi, friend. Okay, I guess I'll go back over here. Da, 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 da. Just hanging out in the Isz Gravestone. So this is taking a little bit longer than I expected it was going to, but that's fine. I've been very proud of myself the last few episodes for having kept them under an hour, but if indeed I do want to do like an entire Chalice dungeon in a single episode, especially a depth 5 one, then yeah, you kind of have to make it a little bit longer. And so given that I've spent a little bit of time in this episode talking about the Chalice Dungeons in general, that will make it a little bit easier to talk about Tumaru Ihil without going into great depth about it in the way that I've done here. So once again, I'm more or less going... Oh, hello. Almost forgot about you. So that's another really interesting aspect of the Chalice Dungeons. So he was wearing the Tomb Prospector set, attire of tomb prospectors who explore the old labyrinth on behalf of the Healing Church. The Healing Church traces its roots to Byrgenwerth, and is therefore aware of the ruins' true importance. They contain much more than mere hunter trinkets. Indeed, they hide the very secrets of the old Great Ones, sought after by those with the insight to imagine greatness. And he was also using Ludwig's Holy Blade. So suggesting that he may in fact be part of, the faction in the church, the people who were hunters under Ludwig's form of the hunters. Or Ludwig's conception of the church hunters, as he called them his honorable Spartans. But then he was also using the Rose Marinus as well. So maybe it's not that simple. Oh, we do not have the Rose Marinus yet, but we can actually purchase it because we got the Cosmic Eye Watcher badge. So we'll have to do that to look at the description. But that would seem to suggest that hunter has allegiance to several different sects of the church. So, I don't know. I don't know what to make of his presence. Oh, and there is a Bloodlicker. And that scares me every single time, even still, even though I know that there's that possibility that the Bloodlickers might show up. But basically every time you visceral attack an enemy in the Chalice Dungeons, there is a small chance that a Bloodlicker will show up to clean up the remains of the blood that that you littered everywhere by virtue of having done a visceral attack. That was really close. So we'll definitely talk about the Bloodlickers a little bit more when we get to Cainhurst. We'll definitely talk about the Bloodlickers a little bit more when we get to Cainhurst, because that seems to be the explanation as to why it is that they're all littering the front, I was going to say the front yard in front of the castle, but... Alright, I'll give this one a fine for trolling me, because it does very much seem as though that would be a hidden path. Oh, well done, well done. So yeah, if you come to this Chalice Dungeon at a reasonable level for the late game of the main game, then even though your build may be reasonable for the point of the game in which you're at, it can be really, really challenging in this place, and it seems like that path is completely for absolutely no reason, or there's no reason for that path to be there, which is kind of disappointing. No. Alright, we're gonna move on. Because I know that there is something significant. There's an illusory wall somewhere. But I think it might be in the post layer treasure area as opposed to this one. Because this one just has all of my least favorite enemies in it. So we're just gonna move on for now. The only thing is actually remembering where we need to go. I think it's here. So as you can see, this entire video has been more or less a demonstration of the fact that even though in some respects my system works, in many respects it does not. But I enjoy having a system nevertheless. We're actually going to go back to the Hunter's Dream because I need to replenish a very specific item here. So something that I didn't notice until I was actually editing the video for the previous episode is that you can actually hear these guys ringing their old hunter's bell. And so once again, this is something that was added with the patch 1.07 that wasn't there previously, that really makes the Chalice Dungeons, really helps make them less grindy. hello, Tomb Prospector Gremia. Who appears to also be using the Rosmarinus, unless that's the Flame Sprayer. So Gremia is generally rather capable, and can in fact be made to more or less, in addition to the other old hunter that we're going to summon shortly, can actually be made to more or less clear out all of the enemies in the dungeon by himself. So we're going to see whether or not he can actually do that. So wait a second. This has got to be the same guy that we were fighting in the second lair. Or in the treasure area. Which has me thinking that maybe we should go back and see whether or not he's still there. Because I believe that hunter enemy is not a single respawn. But for lack of time, probably not going to do that. But he is outfitted identically to, provided that he actually has the Rosmarinus, and that's not just the Flame Sprayer. That was a very dicey situation for a moment there. I guess I should have expected that all those enemies would follow us, come from behind us that way. But also note that the one Tumerian waved around that lantern that they had in a manner that suggests that I think it was buffing the enemies that were around them. I don't know. So we picked up yellow backbone. Special material used in a Holy Chalice ritual. Special body parts collected by the Healing Church. What was this gruesome bait used to lure? The additional rite, Rotted Offering, beckons ungodly forces, normally terrifying things, but also worthy prey for a special hunt. Oh, come on. Yeah, so this is another one of those areas where the shortcut exit brings you to the place where, so, you know, suggesting that where in a way where it suggests to you initially that you should be able to get to that the other side of that door from where you were, but that you find you actually need to progress to the next area in order to gain access to what is behind that door. But yeah, this raises some very interesting questions about how the Hunter's Bell actually works, and whether or not these two are just BFFs, or they're part of the same squad or something, the same troop, or whether or not potentially they may in fact be the same person. It's very interesting, nevertheless. So I know that I'm likely going to be missing some things, and that I've likely already missed some things. But just know that I'm aware of that, and that the reason why we're missing things is simply because this video is already, at least by my recording, about an hour and a half long, so I do want to keep it under 2 hours. You're gonna have to heal up, friend. I hope you're not out of blood vials or something. So interesting to note that there are actually two different types of Old Hunter summons. The blue ones and the red ones. If you summon a red Old Hunter, then you can't summon another red Old Hunter. But if you summon... and vice versa. So you can have one red and one blue, but you can't have two blues or two reds. Because in some areas there are multiple quote-unquote summon signs. And so he is wearing the Madman set, as well as using the Amygdalin arm and Ludwig's rifle. So they both have gear of Ludwig's holy blades. Most tomb prospectors, members of the Healing Church, chosen to explore the old labyrinth, are unable to withstand the weight of the old knowledge and go mad. This attire is worn by those lost souls. The appendages draped across them are said to be a kind of protective charm, or at least that is what these lost souls believe with all of their hearts. So Gremia seems to have somehow maintained his sanity, whereas Waller, whose name I want to pronounce Waller, because I imagine, like many of the names in the game, that it probably has German or at the very least a Germanic origin. So I assume it's Waller and not Waller. Yeah. It's an interesting distinction between the two, and I wonder if the color of the Old Hunter summon sign has anything at all to do with that. And yeah, so as you can see, they are rather capable on their own. So it's quite helpful to have them. And of course they aren't, they're not in every layer of every Chalice dungeon, only very specific ones, but it is nevertheless very helpful to have them when you can have them. Except when they do this. Come on, friends. Thank you. They made it! I wasn't sure that they would. NPCs to the rescue. They saved me there. That was beautiful. Perfect timing. Okay, again. Don't put messages where prompts are supposed to be, please. So all items for which we've already read the descriptions. So there's really nothing all that significant here. Okay, we'll go the safe way so that you don't have to worry about healing up. Now see, I violated my own rule. Because we did not go up before we went down, so... And here we are. This is what we were looking for. Beyond the switch, of course. Sinister Isz Root Chalice. Root Chalice that breaks multiple labyrinth seals. When used in a ritual, this sinister chalice summons the sinister resonant bell. The bell-ringing woman appears to be a mad Pthumerian. According to the choir, the land of Isz lies in contact with the cosmos, which allowed the Great Ones to function on transcendental planes of thought. And it looks almost like surrounding the chalice is an Oort cloud, similar to that which I mentioned in the previous episode seemed to be surrounding Ebrietas. And here you can also buy uncanny and lost iterations of the DLC weapons. But only after you've actually picked them up. So if you're interested in doing that, that's how you get those versions of the weapons. Which have just different gem slots. That's really the only difference between them. But so if you're really into min-maxing for PvP purposes, then you probably already know about that. So I'm not really sure why I'm going into it, but that's what that's for. Okay, come on, Gremia, thank you. So I've talked about this several points in the past, but yeah, the Bloodborne NPC AI isn't the greatest. But we can finally move on to the boss now. And once again, I'm sure I've missed several things, and that's fine. But just in the interest of keeping this video under 2 hours, which also means that we probably won't have that much time to get to comments. I do want to touch on a couple of comments from the previous episode, but as I'm recording this, the most recent episode of Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore was only just released, so I will, of course, address a few comments, but I don't know which ones I'm actually going to be addressing at this moment in time because, the last time I looked at the video, it only had like 3 comments or something, so just to conclude, and I think we should send Gremmy home because it doesn't look like he's going to heal. Just conclude in terms of the significance of the way in which the bosses are ordered in this area. It seems that the deeper we get into the Isz Gravestone, the more Great One-esque the kin enemies that we face. So the more the enemies blur the line separating Great One from kin. With Ebrietas being, as we discussed in the previous episode, more or less the epitome of the blurring of that line. That she is in many ways a Great One, but she is also in other ways kin. That she problematizes a simple distinction between the two. Of course, I would die right at the very end of the Chalice Dungeon, so let's try that, but alone this time. Interesting to note once again, when we passed this spot last time, we had a red summon with us, and in fact we had 2 summons, which is the max in Bloodborne. So we wouldn't have seen this previously. But just as we find Damien of Mensis in front of Ebrietas' boss room in the Waking World, in front of the Altar of Despair, we find him here as well, which is really weird. He's got like a thing, Ebrietas is his waifu or something. But then I guess why would he be helping players kill her? I don't really know. All I could picture during those first two failed attempts, and right there at the end with the double kill, was Ghost Hardware full face palming. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, when we did the Pacifist community run during the Christmas break, Ghost Hardware soloed Ebrietas all by himself in like 15 seconds or something like that. And I'm here getting my butt kicked by Ebrietas over and over again. And yeah, so as you can tell, the Ebrietas that you find in the Isz Gravestone is a fair bit stronger than her counterpart, I guess, or her waking world counterpart. That what we're fighting here is not Ebrietas herself, but a reflection of Ebrietas perhaps at a certain point in time. So I don't know whether there's any lore reason as to why she's so much stronger here, or if it's merely just a gameplay thing. But it's very interesting. Note as well, something that I didn't specifically mention in the previous episode, is that the Urt cloud type thing that appears around her, it appears when she goes into her second phase, after she does that like shockwave scream, and then the Urt cloud type thing appears around her. So very interesting. We also picked up the sinister, or sorry, it was the Isz root chalice. So it's more or less the same description as the one we just picked up, sans the bellwoman stuff. And it says, just once again, according to the choir, the land of Isz lies in contact. According to the choir, the land of Isz lies in contact with the cosmos, which allowed the Great Ones to function on transcendental planes of thought. So as I mentioned, we can actually purchase the Rosmarinus. So we're going to do that now. A special weapon used by the choir, high-ranking members of the Healing Church, sprays a cloud of sacred mist, created by using blood-imbued quicksilver bullets as a special medium. Arias are heard wherever sacred mist is seen, proving that the mist is a heavenly blessing. O fair maiden, why is it that you weep? So keep that in mind as we turn to the comments, because though I've never personally been able to understand what in the heck that item description is meant to convey, we did have a comment which does indeed speak to the probably the most plausible explanation I've seen for that item description. But once again, as with in the last few weeks, but especially this week, I unfortunately don't have nearly as much time to get to comments as I would have otherwise liked. Due in part to the fact that, yeah, this episode is currently approaching or has already exceeded the 2-hour mark. But also because in between the first segment of this episode, where we cleared the dungeon, and the present segment, I actually wound up getting sick again. So go figure. So I hope you all forgive me, and the next episode we're likely going to be going to Yahargul, finally. So I assume that is going to be a rather lengthy episode as well, but still I'm going to try my best to get to more comments than I've been able to get to in the last few weeks. IRLFC9 writes that when it comes to the idea of Great Ones always losing their child and yearning for surrogates, I always thought it was less of a reference to the socially scientific theory of wealthier humans producing less, and more about the similar but naturally scientific R and K selection theory. That growth rate of a population is a function of environmental carrying capacity, and the Great Ones are K-selected species. The main difference between the social and biological theories is that humans can choose not to prioritize having children, while in the natural world all animals instinctively prioritize having children above all else. The Great Ones are these near immortal and all-powerful beings compared to humans, but their inability to create an environment to reproduce is kind of their fatal flaw. By killing Rom, having the Blood Moon descend, and killing Murgo, we are creating an environment more conducive for the moon presence to create a child in. By getting the moon presence to appear, we are exploiting its fatal flaw. And the goal is not just to be mere surrogates, but to create a new Great One that will actively help humanity. In this case, the more R-selective species, and not just be sympathetic to them at times. A few hours later, JSF added his own view on the R and K selection theory, writing, "What inspired Miyazaki isn't just social class, it's R and K selection theory. My understanding is that it's not taken seriously by biologists anymore. You're probably more familiar with it than me, but basically the idea is that organisms focus on either R or K strategies with regard to their offspring, with R strategies favoring many offspring who quickly reach maturity, and K strategies favoring small numbers of offspring who mature slowly under the protection of the parent. So creatures like rats, spiders, flowers, etc. use R strategies, while humans, whales, apes, etc. use K strategies, since K species are more advanced than R species. This led Miyazaki to take the theory through to a fantastical conclusion, you can say that again, in which an organism would become so advanced that it would lose its ability to reproduce entirely." So I guess I did actually come prepared for this episode. I did actually pull up the quotation that I was talking about, which from the official guide, which we discussed in an earlier episode. I can't recall which one. I had to look through my my show notes for all of virtually all of the earlier episodes before I was able to find it. Mostly because I was too lazy to pull my guide out and transcribe it again. But what Miyazaki wrote in the interview with Future Press for the official guide, or what he said rather, is that the Great Ones have all lost their children because of their positions, and as a result they're attracted to special babies. When it comes to living creatures, the stronger or more advanced you are, the fewer offspring you produce in your life. Even with human beings, the birth rates in more advanced countries are lower, right? So, that reference to more advanced countries, as opposed to just, because, countries aren't species. And within more advanced countries, within a country, the country within which I live, Canada, it's one of the richest countries in the world in terms of per capita gross domestic product, or GDP. But there's still a sizable portion of the population that is rather poor, and that, for one reason or another, exhibit higher birth rates than do the more affluent segments of the population. And so something else that I just wanted to point out, and I'm not saying that any of this is incorrect, but I did want to maintain some space for not only messiness in general, but also for class in particular. Because there were several comments, and I apologize to those who wrote those very thoughtful comments, that basically said class has nothing to do with it. But I think based on what Miyazaki wrote, or what he said here, and granted it was in the middle of an interview, he's not a native English speaker, and so, maybe the specific reference to R&K selection theory was lost somewhere along the line, or maybe there was a particular interview wherein he mentions that specifically. But even if it wasn't necessarily what Miyazaki was after, I do still think class has something to do with it, or at the very least that we can look at the story of this game and learn something about class and what that is supposed to entail. And in the previous comment, there was established and we went through this in the previous episode as well, with the whole notion of Great Ones and kin, as, existing in this binary opposition almost, whereby things are neatly bifurcated into these two categories. And we see that here with R and K, with the R strategies involving just reproducing as much as possible, not as humanly possible, and the K strategies, being more advanced and more specific and intentional than those of the R strategies. But there too, it's a binary opposition. And in the previous comment, IRL, although, again, a very thoughtful comment, and I don't disagree necessarily with what's written there, there was our habits of mind in Western society encourage us to establish these binary oppositions. The binary opposition in that comment was between natural and social science. And perhaps this just has a lot to do with my specific field of study, in that my study entails not seeing natural science, as it's called, as being different in kind rather than in degree from the social sciences. And I honestly I'm not especially fond even of the term social science or social scientist, because it is rooted very much in an earlier time when scientists were granted essentially limitless authority, because they were thought to be observing nature directly and not observing nature through the lens of, the dominant scientific ideas of the time. And that disciplines in the social sciences, psychology is a good example of this, where they branded themselves as the new psychology, as distinct from the old psychology, because they would no longer, cater to these so-called pseudoscientific notions of psychology, and that they would adhere much more closely to the likes of physics and chemistry, the hard sciences, as they're called. So, kind of a pointless digression, but just based on what I study and what I spend virtually every day of my life thinking about, I just had to provide that observation. Do with that what you will. Of course, as with anything I say on this show, you guys are always welcome to ask further questions or probe or challenge or whatever the case may be, because we'll get into the specifics of why it is that I'm okay with, and that I encourage all of you to challenge me and to, if not challenging my ideas as I've presented them directly, then at the very least of challenging me to more clearly articulate them in a way that allows me to think about them more clearly myself in turn. JSF goes on to write that Ebrietas is daughter of the stars in Japanese, which seems to be a reference to Cthulhu, one of whose titles is star-spawned. So she doesn't need to be anyone's daughter in a literal sense, but something born from the stars/cosmos, although she probably is some kind of ascended Pthumerian anyway. Alternatively, she could be maiden from the stars, since the same word can mean both daughter and young woman, although daughter is the most common interpretation. It's also the word used in the Rosmarinus item description, so Ebrietas is the fair maiden the choir are singing to. So it would seem that, Ebrietas is weeping over, O fair maiden, why is it that you weep? She's weeping over the corpse of Rom, or the Rom-like creature that whose corpse is lying on the altar of despair. Lovecraft's From Beyond provides a useful model for how insight works. It's a very short story about a man who has his pineal gland stimulated in a scientific experiment, and perceives an overlapping reality filled with strange creatures. The creatures do not normally pose a threat, but become dangerous once they are perceived. Applied to things like the lanterns and the mad ones, it seems like they are always there, but can't harm us unless we can perceive their existence. It's also worth noting that the pineal gland is seen as a third eye in some spiritual traditions, and is linked with enlightenment. So you could see the process of gaining insight is as us stimulating our third eye on the inside to see beyond the physical world, but that perception also allows other forces to cross over and harm us. So that's a really, really excellent way of articulating it and explaining that, which, I understood how it worked, but just I have never heard it explained so clearly in that way. So thank you as always, JSF. The PhD Gamer writes, "Hi Aegon, this may be a weird question, but how are you able to connect the dots with these games? After each playthrough, I'm always left scratching my head in deep thought about the bizarreness of the story plot in this game. Anyways, I found out about your channel recently and subscribed because I just love the content and how you break Bloodborne down. Always with regards from UK. Well, thank you very much for the kind words. And for everyone who leaves very kind words in the comments, I don't get enough of an opportunity. I try my best to respond to as many comments as I can. But I don't often get enough of an opportunity to thank you all for the very kind words that you write in the comments. And just generally speaking with how pleasant you all are. So to answer your question, how am I able to connect the dots in a game like Bloodborne? The short answer is that I'm not. In that I, as a person who attempted when I first played Bloodborne to play it sort of not in total isolation, but by avoiding spoilers as much as possible. And if you watch that playthrough, you know that I started about a week after the game was actually released. Even though I had the preload ready, but I was actually on the west coast of Canada. And I live on the East Coast, so I didn't get back home and thus wasn't able to play until about a week after the release. But even then, if you watch my blind playthrough, which was recorded before I upgraded to my present microphone, so you may find it a considerable step down from my present content because the mic I was using was just the microphone that's affixed to a very crappy Microsoft webcam that I have. And so if you can get past that, you'll see that when I was playing the game sort of in isolation, trying to connect the dots by myself, that I was simply not able to do it. I stumbled into the third ending, the three third chord ending, and mistakenly assumed that I had somehow wasted the third chords earlier on in the game, but it's a long story. But the short story is basically that once again I wasn't able to do it, and at several points towards the end of the playthrough I kept saying over and over again that I couldn't wait to actually finish the game, because then at that point I would finally be able to go and start watching the videos produced by other people. That I would finally be able to start engaging with the community in dialogue in such a fashion that would allow me to better connect the dots, that insights that I was able to come to that perhaps you might not have been able to come to, but that there's a third party which fills in the gaps for all of us, and so that's obviously a gross oversimplification, and I'm just rambling. So I do have a comment which will much better answer your question than I've hitherto been able to. So the comment was from Deso Penguin, who writes, "Thank you very much for the kind words about my comments to the previous video. I have to admit I was giggling like a kid when you started discussing the many possibilities about Ebrietas, Rom, the Kin, and the Great Ones within the text of the video itself. One thing that makes these videos so fun is that you and your guest stars are so responsive to we the audience, who are among ourselves talking in the comment section back and forth as well. So there's so much back and forth sharing and discussion of ideas, not merely a one-way presentation." So that last the last half of that final sentence there is the key, is the answer to your question, and that is I'm able to connect the dots in these playthroughs because I understand that connecting the dots is not something that you can really, I suppose you could do it by yourself if you went into Bloodborne, which I very much did not, with an understanding of Lovecraft and all that stuff. And if you go back to the beginning of this playthrough and you rewatch it, you'll observe that over time I slowly start, I still don't really know all that much about it, about Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos and all that. But I have a much better idea of what it is and what it entails than I did at the outset. So this playthrough has been a journey for me just as much as it has been for, or at least I hope, for those of you watching. That I'm learning as I'm teaching, and you are teaching me as you're learning. So that's kind of, once again, my response as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about these ideas and who is especially interested in pedagogy in particular, that is, theories of learning. And my conception of learning is very much that it shouldn't be a one-way, top-down, active teacher to passive student exchange, but or not an exchange, a transmission, but rather that it's a two-way exchange, and that learning is a process from which both parties grow. Otherwise, in my view, both parties just sort of stagnate. And so that's why, from the outset of this playthrough, and in my prior playthroughs as well, but I didn't really have much of an audience to speak of at that point, so I could only engage into a dialogue insofar as there were people to fire ideas back at me and to challenge my ideas and force me to come to clear articulations therein. But yeah, so to once again answer your question, while not really answering it, I'm able to connect the dots because I rely on all of you out there watching, and because I spend some time on the Bloodborne subreddit reading things less and less these days, because there have been a number of very close calls with respect to Dark Souls 3 spoilers, which is something I'm very perturbed about, that apparently there are people out there who already have the game for some reason. And so I very much appreciate and would request that we continue to abstain from any discussion of Dark Souls 3 in the comments of this series, and respectfully from the rest of my videos as well, because even though, as I just mentioned, my Bloodborne blind playthrough, was very much an exercise in futility, in a sense of me trying to piece together the lore. But I feel like with Dark Souls 3, insofar as it builds upon the foundation built in Dark Souls 1 and 2, that I might stand a little bit better of a chance of coming to a unique interpretation, being able to connect the dots in some way, shape, or form, or at least better than I was able to for my Bloodborne blind playthrough. And even though that particular playthrough will be more one way in a sense that will make it very different from the present playthrough, I do hope you all know that in spite of that, there will be plenty of Dark Souls 3, 2A Dark Souls 3 exchanges to come on my channel and beyond. So once again, I'm sorry that I couldn't get to more comments, but I hope you all enjoyed and that you're continuing to enjoy the playthrough as I am. And I thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.